When we think about something consistently in our minds, is there science around this that validates or doesn't validate that we start to, in the physical world, attract our thoughts?
I can't give a intelligent answer about the law of attraction specifically, but what I can perhaps do is shed some light on what we think we know, what neuroscientists think we know about how thoughts and thinking actually work and how those relate to behaviors. And then I'll give a little anecdote that I think people might appreciate, because it's something that I keep in mind a lot in thinking about goal setting and focus and this kind of thing. So thoughts are, and I know I've covered this before, so I'm going to cover it very quickly because we talked about this last time, but in case someone didn't hear that discussion or forgets, senses are these cells within our body, our eye, our skin, our nose, our mouth, that are taking physical entities in the universe. They're like wavelengths of light, physical touch, and translating that into nerve signals, into electrical signals in the body. That's how the nervous
senses
system,
meaning taste, feel, sight, hearing, the five senses. Gotcha.
The five senses. And people always say, well, what about intuition? That's different. That's not a sense. That's actually a sense of your internal world. It's called interoception as opposed to exteroception, sense of the outside world. So the five senses, and we are whether or not people like it or not, we are heavily constrained by those senses. For instance, a mantis shrimp, of all things, can see like 64 different shades of color that we can only see one shade of, for instance, because they have receptors that can pick out those things. Some animals can see ultraviolet emissions, others can see infrared. A pit viper can see your heat emissions. Humans sometimes think they can see heat emissions, but they can't see heat emissions unless they put infrared goggles on. Then they can. So the senses constrain our experience of the world. And I don't doubt that there are some people that have a little 0.25% more UV detection, or there's even some evidence for weak magnetoreception in humans from good labs. A little bit of, and turtles have very strong magnetoreception.
What does that mean, magnetoreception?
They can sense magnetic fields, so they sense them as, like that's magnetically. Humans have, there's some evidence written up in Science magazine if people want to look it up, which is a quality journal, for weak magnetic sensing in humans. Some humans,
not strong,
but it's not strong, okay? And it's not strong in most people by any stretch. Whereas turtles can navigate long distances based on magnetic fields in the ocean.
Cool.
It's very cool.
That's cool.
It's very cool. So our experience of the world, all humans' experience of the world, is kind of tunneled by these, what we can see and what we can't see. There's a lot happening that we can't see. It's just the reality. That's why people need night vision goggles as opposed to just looking at things in the night without them. So that's key. So there's sensation, and then there's perception, which is simply to say which of those things are we paying attention to. So I can see that this water bottle is, a mixture of blue and glass, and, because I decided to look at it. But I was sensing it out of the corner of my eye the whole time, but I was focused on something.
I can sense the air touching my skin because I'm deciding to focus on that feeling.
Right. Yeah. That's right. So that's perception. And you want to just make sure that we close the hatch on interoception, perception of what's going on. Like, I don't think about my heart rate too much, but if I stop and think about it, I'm thinking about my heart rate, and then I'm just sensing my heart rate. It's still just pressure. It's a physical phenomenon. Okay. Then there's thinking, which we'll get to. Then there's emotions / feelings, and those are complicated, but they are tractable, as we say. We can figure it out. And then there's behaviors, like you're writing right now. It's a measurable thing. It's a real thing. Okay, so what about thoughts? What in the world is thinking? Well, in many ways, thinking is a lot like perception. Perception, again, being which sensations I'm focusing on, except that thinking incorporates sensations from the past, sensations from the present, and can include sensations from the future that we haven't even had yet.
Interesting.
So this, I think, speaks to your question about law of attraction, which is, never really been formalized for the scientific community. So I'm trying to take it and cram it through a neuroscience filter here, see what comes out the other side. But the interesting thing about thinking is it's very hard to control our spontaneous thoughts. So, for instance, I can't prevent myself from thinking something. However, I can deliberately introduce a thought. People forget this, that one of our enormous powers as human beings is another form of top-down control, which is to say, I'm going to write out my name, I am Andrew, or I can think, I am Andrew. Now, it takes a little bit of work. You kind of notice to think something specific, like you would write it out in your head, just as you would write it out on paper. It feels like a little bit of work because it is work. You're taking that spontaneous thought process and you're inserting a thought on top of it. And we know that you can't hold too many thoughts in mind at once. So what I will say is that it's hard to suppress thoughts, but it's actually quite easy to introduce thoughts. And it sounds to me like this law is basically a process of introducing thoughts. And when you start introducing thoughts and you start thinking of thoughts as a form of perception,
the way you view the world,
they're going to shape the way they're going to shape what you see.
Wow.
They're very going to heavily constrain what you see. Now, this has a dark side and a light side. And
Tell me.
The dark side is that beliefs are essentially thoughts that are recurring thoughts, or things that are kind of like books on a shelf that you can reach to anytime. If I say, hey, what about that book out there, Jay Shetty's book, you can go grab it because it's on the shelf right there. Mm-hmm. You can show it to me, right? It's there all the time. You know where it is, and it's very accessible. Whereas if
beliefs are reoccurring thought.
Right.
So you said?
Yeah. Whereas if you have never thought about something in particular, like if we start having a discussion about something that you're not very familiar with, or you tell me about something I'm not very familiar with, then it's going to take some work. It feels like work. So
to understand it, to perceive it, to experience it, to take it in, to question your previous beliefs about something, all that, right?
And there's some interesting data that were published in the journal Neuron this last year, not from my group, that show that beliefs actually have their own rewarding quality. That there's actually dopamine release associated with beliefs.
Having a belief.
Yes. So when you believe something, there are chemical reward systems in your mind that are associated with just repeating that belief. Now, again, this has a dark side and a light side. The dark side is it means that people can be very fixed in their beliefs, and they're actually being chemically rewarded for having the same belief.
The world is flat. I believe the world is flat, and just saying it over and over again.
Or in-group, out-group type thinking of any kind. Or
what do you mean in-group, out-group?
Well, when people think, I believe that group of people over there is this way, or good or bad, right? There's a self-reward mechanism that's getting engaged there.
I'm greher than this group.
Could be greater than or less than. So the beliefs are attached to a set of rewards.
Interesting.
So now the dopamine system is exceedingly powerful because dopamine is a kind of a dumb molecule. It has no brain of its own. It's just a molecule, right? It's just a chemical. But when dopamine is released in our brain, first of all, it tends to orient us towards goals in the outside environment. It's the molecule not just of reward but of motivation. And when we release dopamine, we tend to see the world in terms of external goals. And so you can imagine now if there's a process built up inside us where our thoughts are causing dopamine release, and dopamine is shaping what we see as rewards, what we perceive as rewards.